She said, "You can have the memories. I'll take everything else." She emptied my accounts, took the condo, my business, even my dog. She didn't know what I left behind. Encrypted files, quiet partnerships, hidden leverage. 6 months later, I bought her new company through a fake name. Now she works for me, and every time she gets her paycheck, she pays me back, $1 at a time. I used to believe in the idea of a fairy tale ending. You know the kind, where you meet someone, fall in love, build a life together, and everything works out in the end. For 12 years, I thought Evelyn and I had that. We were a team, partners. She was my equal in everything. I remember when we first met. I was young, eager, and trying to make my way in the world. My business was barely more than an idea, a few plans jotted down on paper. She had this quiet confidence about her, this grace that made people gravitate toward her. Evelyn wasn't just beautiful. She was smart, sharp, and knew how to make things happen. She had a way of making everything seem effortless, and it was intoxicating. In the early years, we built something together, something real. We took risks, both personally and professionally, but we always knew we had each other's backs. She was my partner in every sense of the word. We had a vision, a plan, and we chased it together. Our business grew, expanding into new markets. We made it through the tough times, lean years when we barely scraped by, and celebrated the victories, no matter how small. Evelyn was always there, by my side, a constant source of strength when the weight of the world felt like it was pressing down on my shoulders. But even the strongest foundations have cracks, and ours began to show slowly, almost imperceptibly. It started with small things, late nights at the office, her meetings with friends I had never met, her distant answers when I asked about her day. She had a habit of staring out the window for long stretches of time, lost in thought. I told myself it was nothing. I was busy with the business, she was busy with whatever she had going on, and then there were the vacations. We used to travel together, exploring new places, making memories. But over the last few years, those trips became less frequent. The once spontaneous adventures were replaced with an empty routine. When we did go somewhere, it felt different. The connection wasn't there anymore. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that every marriage has its rough patches, that we'd work through it like we always had before. But the signs were getting harder to ignore. She was slipping away, and I was too blind to see it. I kept working harder, trying to fix the business, trying to fix everything, but in the end, I was fixing the wrong things. I wasn't paying attention to what mattered most. Us. It wasn't until the night she sat me down in the living room, her face unreadable, that I realized just how deep the cracks had gone. "I think we need to talk," she said, her voice flat. Her eyes didn't meet mine. That's when I knew. I had seen the signs. Too many late nights spent alone, too many silent dinners, too many conversations where she was physically present but emotionally absent. But even then, I wasn't ready for what was about to come. "I want a divorce," she said almost casually, as if she were talking about something trivial, like changing the curtains or moving furniture. The words didn't sink in immediately. Divorce. It sounded like something out of a bad sitcom, not something that would happen to me, not to us. You want a divorce?" My voice cracked, disbelief flooding my chest. She nodded, her gaze distant. "It's been a long time coming, Alex. You've been so focused on the business, and I've been lost. I can't do this anymore." I wanted to argue, to beg, to ask what went wrong, but I couldn't find the words. My heart was racing, and I felt like I was suffocating. Divorce. It wasn't supposed to happen to us. But here it was, sitting between us, as if it had always been inevitable. "I'm sorry," she added, her voice barely above a whisper, though her eyes showed no trace of regret. "But I think this is the best thing for both of us." The best thing. I couldn't even comprehend what she was saying. I wanted to scream, to shout, to tell her that everything we had was real. But she wasn't hearing me. Evelyn had made up her mind, and it was too late. In the weeks that followed, everything became a blur. The lawyers got involved, the paperwork, the negotiations. It all felt like a whirlwind I couldn't escape. She had the upper hand from the start, as if she'd already prepared for this day. And the worst part? I let her. I let her control everything. She knew how to manipulate the situation, how to play the system. The business, the house, the assets, all of it went to her. I was left with nothing. I had built it all, worked tirelessly, but in the end, it was gone. She had the contract, the lawyers, and a plan. And I was too focused on what I thought was love to see the truth. The hardest part wasn't losing everything. It wasn't the house or the money or the business. It was realizing that everything I thought I had with her had been a lie. Every shared moment, every conversation, every dream we'd built together, all of it had been just an illusion, a game she had played to get exactly what she wanted. And now I was nothing. Or so I thought. The divorce was final. The papers had been signed, the court ruling was clear, and there was nothing I could do to change it. Evelyn took everything. Our home, the business we'd spent over a decade building, the money I'd worked so hard for. She had the life we'd created, and I was left with nothing. Or at least, that's what I thought. I moved out of the house, packing my things into boxes that seemed to reflect the emptiness I felt inside. I tried to pretend like I was fine. It was easier that way. I could put on the mask, show up at work, and tell the world that I was moving on. But behind closed doors, I was a mess. I barely slept, lost in a haze of anger and confusion. How had I let this happen? How had I let her take everything? The worst part was that I didn't see it coming. Evelyn had been clever, too clever. She'd played me, manipulated me into thinking we were partners, when all along she was preparing for this moment. The divorce wasn't a sudden decision. No, it was a carefully orchestrated plan. Every move had been calculated, every detail accounted for. She had used me, used my trust, my loyalty, my love as a pawn in her game. At first, I was numb. I had lost everything, my home, my business, my dignity. But as the days went on, that numbness began to turn into something else, something darker, more dangerous. I felt humiliated, not just by the divorce, but by how easily I had been duped. How had I not seen this coming? How had I allowed her to take everything from me without putting up a fight? The answer, I realized, was simple. I had trusted her too much. I had believed that love and partnership meant we were equals. But Evelyn had always known the truth, that she was smarter, more calculating, and more prepared for this than I had ever been. The contract she had drawn up with her lawyers was a masterpiece of manipulation. Everything was carefully structured to ensure she got everything. There was no room for negotiation, no space for me to fight back. The business, the house, the investments, all of it was hers. The only thing I was left with was a life in ruins. It wasn't just the financial loss that stung, it was the emotional betrayal. I had trusted her with my heart, my future, my everything, and she had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I spent the first few weeks in a haze, trying to find a way to get back on my feet. I couldn't go back to the life I had before. It was gone, obliterated in an instant. But there was something else inside me, something deeper, something I couldn't ignore, a flicker of anger, a spark of determination. I wasn't going to let her win, not like this. I started to plan. At first it was just small things, checking my old accounts, going through the documents she had left behind. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I needed to do something, anything. It wasn't until I stumbled upon one of her old passwords in a document I found tucked away in the back of a drawer that I had an idea. That was when the pieces began to fall into place. I wasn't stupid. I had always been meticulous, always paying attention to the small details. I had worked with her for years, so I knew how she thought. I knew the systems we had set up, the software we used, the accounts we kept. And I knew that somewhere, buried deep, there had to be something I could use. Over the next few weeks, I started to dig deeper. I went through old contracts, old files, things I had never thought to look at before. And that's when I found it. A trail. I had always been careful with my business dealings, leaving little room for error. But there were things Evelyn didn't know about. Things I had set up years ago, just in case. Hidden accounts, encrypted files, contracts that were buried in the shadows. It was the kind of thing I'd never needed to use, But in the back of my mind, I had always wondered if I'd ever need it. And now I did. For the first time since the divorce, I felt like I had control again. It wasn't much, just a small, almost imperceptible advantage. But it was enough. I didn't rush into anything. I took my time, carefully going over the details, making sure I wasn't leaving anything to chance. Evelyn had always underestimated me, always thought I was too focused on the business to notice the finer details. But now I had time, I had space, and I was going to use it. I started to reassemble my life, piece by piece, in secret. I found work where I could, took on small projects, anything that would allow me to keep moving forward. But every time I did something, I was also working on something bigger. I knew I wasn't just building a new life. I was building the foundation for my revenge. 6 months passed, and in that time, things started to change. I was no longer the man I had been before. I was colder, more focused, less willing to trust anyone. Evelyn's life had moved on, or so I thought. She was still running the company, still playing the role of the successful, powerful businesswoman. But I knew things were far from perfect. I had my eyes on her every move. And then one day I saw it. A news story. Evelyn's company was under investigation for tax fraud. The news hit me like a bolt of lightning, yet it didn't surprise me. Evelyn had always been clever, but there were cracks in her armor, cracks I had known about all along, cracks I had been waiting for. She had built her empire on lies, on manipulation, on bending the rules just enough to stay one step ahead of the law. And now it was coming back to bite her. Tax fraud. The story was everywhere, plastered across news outlets, whispered in boardrooms. It was a scandal, a huge one, the kind that could bring down even the most powerful corporations. And Evelyn's company was no exception. For the first time since the divorce, I felt something stir within me, a sense of purpose, a rush of cold satisfaction. I had been watching her every move in the shadows, piecing together the trail she thought was buried. The accounts I had hidden, the contracts she didn't know about, the encrypted files I had left behind, they were my insurance. Evelyn thought she had taken everything from me, but I had always known that things weren't as clean as she thought. She'd left herself vulnerable in her quest for control. The tax fraud investigation was the break I needed. I didn't have to act immediately, not yet. I had already spent months quietly rebuilding myself, focusing on things I could control, making connections in the business world, and positioning myself in a place where I could make my next move. But now it was time to escalate things. I started by reaching out to a few old acquaintances from the past, people I had worked with before the divorce. They didn't know the full extent of my fall, but they knew me. They knew my work ethic, my drive, and the reputation I'd once had in the industry. I needed to get back in the game, and these people were my gateway. I didn't show my hand too quickly. I let them come to me one by one, offering a chance to work together, to collaborate on projects. But I had an agenda. Every conversation, every meeting was an opportunity to plant a seed, to make connections that would benefit me in the long run. I didn't need to rush. Evelyn was already too deep in her own mess to realize what was happening behind the scenes. And as the days passed, the investigation into her company deepened. News of her involvement with tax evasion began to surface. The scandal grew larger. Evelyn was scrambling to save face, issuing statements, hiring lawyers, and trying to bury the story. But the more she fought, the more the public started to question her integrity, her leadership. Her flawless image was cracking, and people were beginning to see her for what she truly was. A master manipulator who had used everyone around her, including me. I could feel the walls closing in on her. But I wasn't ready to strike just yet. I needed more information, more leverage, and I knew where to get it. In the months following the divorce, I had quietly started tracking the company's finances. I'd learned enough about the way Evelyn ran things, how she balanced the books, how she kept everything just on the edge of legality. I knew there had to be something deeper, something she was hiding that could turn the tide in my favor. It wasn't just about money. It was about exposing the truth, about making her pay for everything she'd done to me and to everyone else she'd manipulated along the way. One evening late at night, I received an encrypted email. It was from one of my old contacts, someone I'd planted in the company before the divorce. They had access to the financial records, and they had managed to get their hands on something important. A list of transactions, invoices, and documents that could expose the full extent of Evelyn's fraudulent dealings. I could feel my pulse quicken as I scanned through the files. The numbers didn't lie. There it was, the smoking gun. Evelyn had been siphoning money off the company for years. The tax fraud was just the tip of the iceberg. She had been hiding assets, falsifying reports, and using the company's finances to line her pockets. It was a scheme that had lasted far too long, and it was all going to come crashing down. But this was where I could step in. I spent the next few weeks carefully orchestrating my next move. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted to make sure Evelyn paid the price, and not just financially. I wanted to ruin everything she had built, to show her just how far I was willing to go to take back what was rightfully mine. I made a series of well-timed investments. I started quietly purchasing shares in the companies that had dealings with Evelyn's. Companies that were, unknowingly, tied to her fraudulent practices. I knew the time would come when I could make my presence known, when I could leverage my new position to destroy her. But the key was patience. I couldn't afford to act too soon. The investigation into her tax fraud had already begun to put a strain on her reputation, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she would need help. She would need someone to bail her out, and I would be there, watching from the shadows, ready to make my move. In the meantime, Evelyn's life continued to unravel. Her once pristine public image was tarnished. Clients and investors started pulling out of her company. The media was relentless, digging into every aspect of her life, exposing more lies, more manipulations. It wasn't long before her company's stock price plummeted. I knew she was getting desperate, and that's when I made the call. It had been 6 months since the first whispers of Evelyn's downfall began, and in that time, she had fallen from her pedestal. The scandal had erupted, snowballing into a full-blown crisis. Her company was under investigation, her assets frozen, and every move she made was being scrutinized. But what she didn't know, what she still didn't know, was that I had been quietly pulling the strings all along. I had spent the last few weeks positioning myself. Through strategic investments, I had bought up enough of her company's shares to have a say in its direction. I was no longer the man she had divorced, weak and defeated. I had become something else, a shadow in the corporate world, a silent investor with the power to destroy everything she had left. The call came early one morning. It was from one of the last people I expected to hear from. Her lawyer. Evelyn was in trouble. Desperate trouble. "Mr. Roberts," he said, his voice tight, "Evelyn needs your help. She's in deep. The company is facing bankruptcy, and we've already lost half of her major investors. She wants to meet with you. She's asking for a partnership. She's willing to offer you a seat on the board in exchange for your help getting the company back on track." I listened to him, a small smile creeping onto my face. She was desperate. She had gone from throwing me out like trash to begging for my help. The same woman who had taken everything from me was now asking me to bail her out. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. "I'll consider it," I said, my tone cool and indifferent. "Let me think about it, and I'll get back to you." I hung up the phone, the smile fading from my face. The time had come. I had already prepared the documents, the ones that would destroy her, the ones that would expose her not only for tax fraud, but for the years of deceit, manipulation, and embezzlement she had committed. These were the documents that no one had seen yet, the ones buried deep in the hidden files, the encrypted accounts I had set up years ago. I wasn't going to help her. I wasn't going to save her company. I was going to watch it burn. The meeting with Evelyn was set for the following afternoon, at her now struggling office in a high-rise building that had once symbolized power. Now it looked more like a tomb. The glass walls were dirty, and the luxurious furniture was chipped and worn. She greeted me at the door, her eyes heavy with sleepless nights, her face pale and strained. The woman who had once walked into a room with an air of authority now looked defeated. She had aged rapidly, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of cold satisfaction at the sight. "John," she said, her voice shaky but still trying to sound confident, "thank you for agreeing to meet. I know we've had our differences, but I need you. The company needs you." I didn't respond immediately. I simply took a seat studying her. She looked vulnerable, her carefully maintained facade crumbling in front of me. I see you're in a bit of a mess, I said, leaning back in my chair. I'm surprised you thought I'd be the one to help you out of it. Her eyes flickered with a mix of anger and desperation. I, I was wrong, John. I admit it. I made mistakes. But I'm still the same person you once loved. We can fix this. Together. We can rebuild. I let her words hang in the air for a moment. My mind was far from the idea of reconciliation. I was calculating my next move, knowing that the cards I held were far stronger than anything she could offer. I know what you've been up to, Evelyn, I said, my voice low and steady. She froze. Her face paled even further, and I could see the flicker of panic in her eyes. What do you mean? I slid a file across the desk, its contents carefully arranged. It was a collection of documents, contracts, transaction records, emails, everything that would ruin her. I could see her hands shake as she picked up the file and began to leaf through the pages. Her eyes widened with each passing page, the color draining from her face as the weight of her crimes sank in. You've been stealing, lying, hiding assets, I continued. You thought I wouldn't find out. But I always keep track, Evelyn. Always. I made sure of it. And now you're going to pay the price. Her breath came out in short, panicked gasps. John, please, you don't understand. I had no choice. You weren't there for me. You left me alone. I did what I had to do. I could barely keep myself from laughing. She was still trying to justify her actions, trying to make me believe that somehow this was all my fault, that she hadn't been the one pulling the strings all along. No, Evelyn, I said, my voice icy. You did this all on your own. You manipulated me, used me, and then threw me away. You thought you could destroy me, but you didn't. You forgot one thing. I'm still here, and I'm going to make sure you pay for every single lie. The door to her office opened and a man walked in. Her new partner, the one she had been trying to impress for months, the one who had helped her keep her empire afloat after she'd pushed me out. He looked at me with confusion and mild concern, but I didn't care. His involvement wouldn't matter soon enough. I turned my attention back to Evelyn. She was still clutching the file, her fingers trembling. She was finished. You think this is a joke, John? She whispered, her voice barely audible. You think I won't fight back? No, I said with finality. This is your reality now. You're finished. The next few weeks were a blur of legal battles, media coverage, and financial collapse. Evelyn's company was exposed for everything it had been. Fraudulent, dishonest, and built on the backs of everyone she had manipulated along the way. The investors who had once trusted her pulled their money. The clients who had believed in her walked away. And just when it seemed like she might recover, a new set of charges was filed against her. The damage was irreversible. I didn't have to do much. I had planted the seeds long ago. Now it was time to watch them grow. As her world crumbled around her, I stood back, detached and unemotional. This was my revenge, the final piece in a game I had played for far too long. And Evelyn, the woman who had taken everything from me, was left with nothing. She had lost it all, and I had won.